Hi, welcome back. When I left off last week, we were looking at the initiants in Aristophanes' frogs and how that chorus offer a lot of comedy to the play and give a nice zing in the middle with a parabasis. This week, we're going to have a closer look at the whipping scene. It's a really famous scene in Aristophanes' frogs, and it really plays on the role reversal and the social role reversals that we see in Athens after the Battle of Arginusae, when slaves are given citizen status. So, we know already that Dionysus is disguised and that he's dressed as Heracles in order to ensure he has a safer, happier trip down into the underworld to meet the tragedians. What we see when he arrives is his fear as the initiants approach, mistaking them for a monster, and now Dionysus is trying to leverage his costume, his disguise as Heracles, to ensure that he has a better trip. The problem is that Heracles doesn't quite have the reputation he promised he did. Dionysus looks up to his half-brother and expects him to have a really good reception in the underworld, when actually that's not the case. And this really plays on the two different forms of Heracles that we see in Greek myth. So we have the heroic Heracles and we have the comic Heracles. And you might remember that I mentioned in an earlier video, the comic Heracles is the kind of bloated glutton. We're thinking an athlete who kind of goes to pot after their career has ended. He's a lout, he's a bit of a stereotype. You could think of Al Murray's pub landlord, that kind of figure, and he's really blokey and really brash and really funny. A lot of the jokes around Heracles in comedy are based on him being a bit of a glutton and being really greedy. So he's not the peak of physical prowess that he's depicted to be actually in the New York production of Aristophanes' Frogs. And so the premise of a lot of the jokes is that really Heracles has been tear-arsing through the underworld, eating things he shouldn't be eating, sleeping with women he shouldn't be sleeping with, running up debts and not paying his bills. He's really gone to the underworld and treated it like a weekend in Las Vegas, and he's upset a lot of people in the process. So Dionysus arrived and immediately is not really getting the reception that he expected. So the first character that we meet in the underworld is Aeacus, and Aeacus comes forward accusing Dionysus, aka Heracles, of having stolen Cerberus, or Cerberus you might know him as well. So Cerberus is of course the three-headed dog that Heracles was asked to retrieve as part of his 10 labours. So, you know, to start off with, we've got a fair kind of mythical crime that we can kind of get on board with. And Dionysus just really panics, he absolutely bricks it. Aeacus threatens violence on him, he's panicking, and he swaps costumes with his slave Xanthias to try and avoid really being punished as though he's Heracles. So in a kind of rush, frantically, when Aeacus goes in to pull somebody else to kind of punish Dionysus, he swaps costumes with Xanthias really quickly. Says, hey, take my place and get me out of trouble. But then, in the meantime, after Xanthias and Dionysus have swapped costumes, a maid comes out, and that's a totally different ballgame. The maid seems to give Dionysus / Heracles, or the maid seems to give Xanthias now / Heracles a warm welcome, seems to look on him favourably and says, oh, I've got some really beautiful women inside who have been waiting for you. So, as you'd expect, Dionysus is in a rush to get that Heracles costume back on and meet these women. And every time they swap places, it puts Dionysus at a disadvantage. So once Dionysus has got his Heracles costume back on, the maid comes out with somebody to pursue him, to pursue Heracles for running up bills and eating food he shouldn't have eaten. So he never really splits Dionysus's way, and it builds on that kind of interchangeability of Xanthias the slave and Dionysus the god. They really seem in some ways on an equal footing, despite the fact that Dionysus should be calling the shots. And this is something that was played on in the opening scene, where we see Xanthias lugging all this luggage around and asking how to keep the audience happy. And yet Dionysus, when he's rowing in his rowboat because Xanthias can't join him on the ferry to the underworld, you know, his arse hurts, he's got blisters on his hands, he's suffering in all the same ways that Xanthias has done. So there's not really such a clean distinction between the two. So finally, there's what ends up being a whipping scene where it's Heracles' reckoning. So Xanthias is dressed up as Heracles, presumably to kind of take the fall for all the trouble that Heracles got him. And when he's held accountable, Xanthias says, yeah, you know, the things I did were really terrible, so to punish me you should whip my slave. And he throws Dionysus under the bus anyway. So the costumes don't help Dionysus because he's always outsmarted, he's always the kind of step behind, which, given that he's pitched at the start of the play as being the saviour of Athens, is hilarious. You know, Dionysus, the saviour of Athens, can't row a rowboat. Dionysus, the saviour of Athens, has a fat arse in Charon's ferry. You know, Dionysus, the saviour of Athens, can't even get the right costume on, can't outsmart people, he's outsmarted by his own slave. And this isn't like a special slave who fought at Arginusae, it's not a citizen slave. It's really actually showing slaves in a kind of favourable light and giving them the upper hand. So there's all this sort of humour then that Xanthias starts to put down, where Dionysus says, no, you can't whip me, I'm a god. And Xanthias says, well, you know, if he's a god, he's not going to feel it. And we know he will because we've seen the rowing scene, so we know exactly what to expect. And we know just how much trouble Dionysus is in. So he's whipped off to be whipped. And we see, in the end, Xanthias and Dionysus are being whipped side by side. And they're trying to hold in their pain to show that they are the true god and that they're not being affected. So we have this really innovative use of sticomythia. So sticomythia are alternate lines that we see in Greek drama, one line at a time. They're usually used in arguments or to build pace, but here they're being used as a kind of exchange between the two as they try to show that, I suppose, they're harder than the other one and that they're not going to feel this punishment. So we have another play on comic costume here, where the Heracles costume, not only is it rubbish, also is really decisive. For some reason in the underworld, this crap costume is really effective, no matter who wears it, which seems really absurd. We have a lot of humour based on physical humour and the fact that Dionysus experiences pain, and I really like the way that this is produced in the New York production of Frogs. You know, we have this very flamboyant, kind of chubby Dionysus, who's quite fey and quite easily affected and a bit of a softie. And we also have the kind of role reversal between the comedy double act, which we've sometimes seen in Only Fools and Horses, and it can be quite funny. You know, this imbalance that we have between the two and this kind of tug of war for who's going to take the lead in each scene. So I hope that gives you a helpful overview of the whipping scene in Aristophanes' Frogs. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share the videos to keep the channel going, and take a look at the new website I've got up. I've also got some artwork up on Redbubble for you to have a look at too. Okay, I'll see you next time. Thanks!